So, the reality around the data availability today is pretty choppy. A lot of you guys know there's tectonic shifts in what data is available in market today. Earlier, we used to have exposure logs and log level data. All of that's gone right now. A lot of the reporting has been chopped down. We've lost attribution windows in Facebook and along the way. So a lot of data restrictions are coming into play. And from our vantage point, where we are a measurement company, when we look at the data space and the media space today, what we are kind of taking away here is that measurement that is anchored on first-party data, right? Your data, which is your transaction data, your site-side analytics data that you collect from consumers directly, first-party data, is very robust. It's your data, you have permissions on it. And any measurement that is anchored on that is a future-proof, durable way for you to build a marketing measurement strategy. And we believe that that's the way forward. So, and there are 3 different types of testing you can do with first-party data. One is geo-match market testing. 2 is what we call retargeting testing, which is where you do cohort your site-side visitors into different cohorts. And 3 is CRM testing. Okay? It's a really nice final slide I wanted to show you. Maybe we'll get to that eventually. But the idea here is that if this is coming up in a second, we'll catch that. There you go. So, if you think of the funnel between prospecting and retention, geo essentially can play a big role in testing all upper funnel and mid funnel channels in your media mix, right? Now, why that's kind of valuable is that at least a lot of clients in our portfolio are growth marketers, and a lot of your investments are probably anchored on user acquisition, on prospecting and user acquisition, and any channel that supports geo-targeting, you can actually geo-test on. So you can actually do differential treatments on different geos and do geo-testing. Therefore, there is a ubiquitous appeal to geo-match market testing that we think you'll find pretty appealing. Okay, go to the next. Okay, just before to kind of zoom out here, just go to the previous slide. The number of experimental frameworks. From what can you test? What are the different kind of experimentation frameworks, testing frameworks that are to test channels in your media mix? Broadly, there are 2 types of tests you can run. One is what we call geo-match market tests, and second is what we call audience split tests, right? There are 2 broad frameworks for testing. In both cases, you are splitting audiences and giving them differential treatments. But in one case, we are actually splitting markets, which may be states or DMAs or zip codes. In other cases, you're taking audiences. Imagine a CRM house file, and you're cohorting audiences into panels and then giving those panels different treatments, okay? So the 2 different, very broad, sort of from a 20,000-foot overview, this is the different kinds of tests you can run. You go to the next slide. With respect to geo specifically, what is geo-match market testing? How do you actually sort of conceptualize the idea of geo-match market test? So imagine, just for the sake of this argument, let's keep this, the geo grain to be state level. Imagine all the states in the US. You want to take your big states, your New York, California, Texas, the states that represent a lot of revenue, and then leave them alone. Okay, essentially what we call the BAU cell, business as usual cell, which is you take all those states and not disrupt them, leave them as is, so that your business is not disrupted. And take another set of states, let's say smaller and medium-sized states like Alabama, Arkansas, Colorado, Maine, Missouri, and whatnot, and put them into a cell and do a treatment called a holdout treatment. So imagine that you have Facebook running, you want to understand the incrementality of Facebook, you're spending, let's say, $250,000 a month on Facebook, you want to understand the contribution of Facebook to your top line, right? In this particular case, what you're doing is you're holding out Facebook from those markets. Basically, you're going dark on Facebook on those markets, and you're waiting and watching to see how much those markets dip by, how much does the revenue or the conversions dip by in those markets. And that dip in revenue or conversions is essentially attributed to the impact of Facebook in those markets, okay? Now, alternatively, there's another kind of test called the scale-up test or the heavy-up test, where you're trying to understand the scale of Facebook. Where now you're spending $250,000, you want to understand what would happen to the impact of Facebook when you double your budget, when you go from $250,000 to $500,000 a month, right? All of us understand the idea of diminishing returns. You clearly know that the media is not going to provide the same level of return at increased spend. But what is that return? Is it going to be 2x, half x, or 60%, 70%? So that is what the scale set does. So in the scale cell, similarly, you take a bunch of markets and you simulate doubling the budgets. You double the budgets just in those markets, and you watch to see how much the actual revenue grows by, conversions grow by in those markets. And that growth is now attributed to the marginal contribution of Facebook additional spend over and above the BAU levels of spend. Okay. Now, this is a broad idea for match market testing. You go to the next slide, Nick. The benefits of this test is that it's again comprehensive, ubiquitous. Any channel that supports geo-targeting will support geo-testing. Secondly, it's unbiased and transparent, which means that it's your data. So your finance people can see how certain markets are doing and they're either dropping or growing. So the data and the assets are very transparent. It's not Facebook's data set, it's not Pinterest data set or TikTok's data set. It's your own data set. So it allows you to actually make those assessments with confidence. Okay. Now, let's look at the results from the poll. Nick, how do you respond to these results? When you look at these results, does it look typical to you? You manage all your clients. How does this represent in terms of marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, this doesn't surprise me. I think people are starting to dabble here. I mean, obviously, I work with a lot of measured clients, and so I have work with a lot of folks that are doing more and more of this. If I go back a bit and I kind of talk about some of my experience at the enterprise level, I think there were early adopters here that were working to kind of build this out as a real, competitive differentiation, right? I mean, we have a guy on the data science team from Uber. 3 or 4 years ago, they were building out a really expensive data science team to build these out specifically, and they were getting a lot of value out of doing this, but it wasn't really very accessible, broadly in the market because, and I know you'll get into it, geo is frankly difficult to do. Now, things like Google's GeoX tool, Facebook is starting to, kind of get into and promote geo a bit. Certainly folks that do a lot of or have played a lot in linear advertising, linear TV advertising, testing out in various markets, has some relevance. So there's some history here, but I think people are starting to play with it more and more. It's interesting to see that we've got a good chunk of people in that 6 to 20, even though, well over the majority is still in that sort of never or kind of 1 to 5 range. I would expect that if we ask this in 10, 12 months, that you're going to start seeing the numbers shift here, and you're going to start seeing more people out of the never group and even more people in the kind of the 6 to 20 group, because I really think that's the way the market seems to be moving. I actually wanted to do a quick follow-up poll. For those of you that haven't done geo or have done less geo, are there specific blockers to doing it here? So, would love to hear for folks that haven't done it or are doing it only minimally, what they think the biggest barrier is here.
Nick, why don't you talk about this from your perspective? What are the biggest blockers for clients today who are doing geotesting? Is it just education? Is it the access to data?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, right? And we spent, a lot of us, myself included, but the industry in general spent the last 10 years getting really smart on marketing mix modeling and multi-touch attribution and site-side analytics and user level pathways. Like if you actually think about, geo pre-existed all of those things, right? Testing for linear or direct mail or radio, people were geo-testing these things many decades ago, right? I mean, it fell out of fashion for certain reasons and because of certain levels of difficulties. I would generally say some of those are actually a bit easier to tackle today. But, for the last kind of decade, we've been chasing those other approaches, model-based approaches, regression approaches, things like that. So there's not this sort of institutional knowledge about how to do geo, right? And so when you look at the Uber example, they built that from scratch and they threw a lot of money at the problem, and that's a solve for Uber, but that's not widely accessible. So I think as the market has shifted, as walled gardens have rised, as privacy has come up, this is coming back, and it's coming back into fashion. And I think there are, digital platforms allow you to target at much more granular levels. You don't have to pay price premiums like you would for radio or TV or things like that. So it's demystifying and making it accessible in some ways, but I think there are still some really difficult things to crack here. And I'm sure you're going to get into it, but, market selection and market modeling and some of these other sorts of things are, it represents a skill set that isn't necessarily in-house for a lot of analytics companies that we work with. Yeah.
it's interesting that results are pretty spread out. You can see that, many people are doing it and they're finding it too complex, but there's about 1/3 of the audience also doesn't know where to start. So there's a good spread
that
of
might
experiences
be,
in the market.
I think that's a little indicative here, right? It's either I don't know where to start, or I know where to start and I start to unpack the data science and I kind of run into, okay, this is really hard to do. And, as you can imagine, if you pick geos with the dartboard, and then you kind of analyze them by what happened before the test, what happened after the test, you'll, as you can guess, you may get some very noisy results here.
That's right. Let's go to the next slide. So I think here we can transition to Ty. Ty, do you want to take over and run the vision for the slide? What is the vision for our product, and give us a demo?
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. So just before we jump into the demo, first of all, I'm very excited to see so many people interested in Geo, which is my personal baby for the past year. And I think it's a great thing that we just had this poll, and I'm kind of seeing the numbers and I'm seeing why people are, first of all, whether they're engaging with Geo, yes or no, and then if not, why. I think it's very interesting that over 70% said either never or 1 to 5 times. So personal goal for me is to get you over that. And then again, very interesting to see that the majority said it was too complicated and they were not sure where to start. And then also like a small tail end of the insights are not actionable or it's too noisy. And I wanted to say this is the exact vision that was powering this product development. We wanted to take this thing that was really available only for the Ubers and the Lyfts and the very sophisticated data science brand out there, and make it, productize it, make it accessible and available for any brand to really adopt and start implementing geotesting in your roadmap. So let me just do this. All right, this is our geo-experiments dashboard, brand new. And I'm going to walk you through how I design an experiment. Now, for those of you who have done it before, just keep in mind how long it takes you to do this on your own. And if Madan or Nick, can you start the clock? I just like to show you how simple it is, how quick it is. And this is with me making all those annoying explanations. All right, so we start, and I'm just going to name this test. I can choose my conversion type, my geogranularity, my duration, and I'm going to schedule when I want it to happen. All right, this is editable later on, but for now. All right, so actually I should have started with geotesting. Just for the sake of geotesting doesn't really make a lot of sense. It is very much connected, and James is going to talk about this later on, to a business question that you're looking to understand. So the way to think about it is I want to understand what is the incrementality of a certain marketing effort that I'm running, or I want to see if there is scale potential. So I would use a geotest in order to find an answer for that. I'm going to take, for this example, the 2 most common business questions that we get. The first one is, what is my brand search incremental? Yes or no? It's kind of like the Google tax question. Do I have to pay so much money to put on my branded keywords, or is my SEO strong enough so it really picks up the slack and I don't have to pay as much money? And shopping, a lot of people are interested in shopping. A lot of people want to know if they can scale into it. So my second business question is going to be, can I scale my PLA, my shopping? All right, so I'm going to name my cell. This is going to be brand holdout. As Madan mentioned before, there are 2 treatments. We can either hold out completely or scale into it. I'm going to choose my platform, and this is connected to your ad account. And I'm just going to filter, and I'm going to select all my brand campaigns, and I'll add a new cell. And this one, the second business question was, can I scale into shopping, right? So this is going to be PLA scale. Whoops, sorry. And oh wait, I have to select my platform, obviously. And it's already shopping. All right. These are my 2 cells. I will note that you can go up to 4 cells. So every flight of Geo is actually 4 business questions that you can test. And we highly recommend adopting it as part of your regular cadence and roadmap for experimentation. Next.
Hey,
okay.
Ty.
Yeah.
Ty, go back and change your scale cell to scale. It goes over that.
Sorry. Thanks, Madan. This is a treatment cell. Yes, so PLA scale and then brand holdout. We good? All right.
All right.
Step 2. So as you can see, it's a very wizard-like experience. Step 1, we chose our inventory. Step 2 is the magic of data science. Now, whenever I demo this, and I've done this a few times, I get overwhelmed. People don't really get it. For those in the audience that did this internally, you would understand. This is productizing and taking the data science and putting it in a small box and automating the hell out of it. What it will do, once I click the approved test markets, it will automatically identify the markets that you should be using for the test. So first of all, the markets that are going to be your anchor, Madan touched on this before. These are your revenue generating markets, markets that we do not want to disturb in any way or fashion. We don't want to introduce business risk unnecessarily, and markets that are correlated to those markets. So I'm just going to click here. It automatically selected my top AUs, and these are all potential test markets. They're not all going to be used. It just means that they're on the table for testing. If you want, you can remove some if you have any marketing reasons, but for now, I'm just going to leave it as is, and I'm going to improve it. So right off the bat, the algorithm, first of all, the model ranked them, and the algorithm now spread them out evenly based on their correlation and rank. And now let's do some unpacking on what's happening here. So this would be part of step 2. You can see every tile is a cell. We have a brand holdout and a PLA scale, and we're getting this indication of recommendation. So obviously this doesn't look as good as the other. I'm going to open this, and you'll be able to see these are the markets that have been selected for the cell. And it really just asking me to put in my incrementality assumption. You can punch that in. I'm going to leave it as a default, but just so you know, this is dynamic. So if I change it, you can see that it will change to not recommended, meaning there isn't enough volume for the test to run. And really what this is doing is it's helping you make sure that the design is of high quality, and the quality of the design is super important. If you kind of skimp on the quality of the design, you'll have noisier results. So it's really important to hit that recommendation threshold, which is the MDL for now, is what we call it. All right, so now we're gonna go for the PLA scale. That's the scale cell. And here we have a lot more knobs and bobs to play with. So the incrementality is just like before. It depends on the tactic. I'm gonna leave it at 50 because that's just the default for now. Impression share is a metric that we're going to get from the platform that we're using. What it's essentially saying is how much of the current available inventory am I reaching? And so by default, if I'm reaching 20%, it means that I have 80% to scale into 80% marginal. The benchmark for this is typically 15, so I'm just going to put 15. Target of available inventory is essentially how much am I going to scale? So I'll just play with it, and I'll ask that you look right here in the expected cost. As I scale more, my expected cost goes up. And of course, my expected lift will go up, and it can affect my recommendation. If I go really high, my recommendation is going to become a lot stronger. Okay, and a diminishing return. This is a very familiar to any marketer. As you scale, we expect conversion rate to go down, so this takes that into account. And by the way, these are the markets that were associated with this cell. Okay, I'm ready to go. So I saved. There's this budgeting module that I'm not going to go into. It's tactical, just for the CMO to understand costs and risks going into this test. But if someone can stop the clock, this is how long it takes to design a geotest for us. The only thing left for me to do is click finish and schedule, which I will not do because it's a live account.
7 minutes. 7 minutes time.
Okay, I'm getting better. It used to take 10 minutes. I'm not going to click this because it's a live account, and it's going to push things like to an actual test. But really, this is all that you need. If you need to get approval internally, then you just save it as draft and you share it with execs. So part of the process is, of course, the design, which we just did. But another part is implementation and then reporting. So I wanted to show you how implementation works. You're going to have to excuse me for the screenshots. I can't show you an actual ad account of a real client. But just to show you, we had a scale design just now demoed. And you can see here, this is a screenshot taken from a real account. This is women's tops, and this is the cloned scale. This is women's accessories, and this is women accessories scale. These are actually all pairs of BAU, so your main campaign and your scale campaign. If we click onto it, you'll see this is the women's tops. These are the exclusions, so the API automatically pushed all the exclusions out, so you don't have to worry about it. It's implementing the holdout and the scale. And then this is the women's top scale, and you can see that these are the targeted locations. So easy peasy. I don't know, whoever, I did this myself, the implementation would always be difficult. It's very error prone. This way it's like no noise whatsoever. Okay, so we designed 7 minutes. We flighted, which can be 16, 23, 30. I mean, there are a few options, but let's do 30. The test runs, it needs 7 days to mature, and then we can look at the actual reporting, which is what matters. And I'm gonna do a brief run on reporting, and then I'm gonna hand it off to James. I actually have it pulled up here, I believe. There we go, okay. So, putting you into the mindset, you waited for 30 days, you're anxious to get the results. Now is like, after all this investment, you wanna get the value into it. This is the tool that we're currently using, and I'm gonna walk you through top to bottom and left to right. So at the top, you get the bottom line, really what matters. So if you wanna know what is the incremental CPA for Snap holdout in this use case, it is 18.6, as opposed to what you're seeing in your actual vendor reports, which is last touch, 7.19. And for YouTube, it is 17.64 instead of 15.28, which is not that bad, actually. It's very good for YouTube. But now I'm gonna walk you through the story of reporting. So the first question we're asking ourselves is execution. Was the design executed as we intended it to? And really, there's not a lot to show and talk about. You just wanna make sure that the percent change in spend was as we wanted it to be. So right now, I'm on YouTube Heavy Up, and you can see that this is my BAU. There was very slight percent change in spend. So it really was business as usual, and my scale went up. And if I go to YouTube holdout, it dropped. So execution was correct, and we're good to go. There was probably, the 2% missing is probably this first day, but that's about it. Analysis. This is really the under the hood bread and butter of what the reporting is about. And what we're looking to do, essentially it's a fancy A/B test. You wanna see what was observed versus what we predicted, okay? So let's start with the holdout. I think that's the easiest one to grasp. And I'm gonna take your eyes right to this area. So we observed that in the holdout states, in the holdout cells, we achieved 19.6K conversions during the experiment period. Using data science, and there are multiple models we can use to leverage this predicted conversions, we predicted 21.9K. Now, the difference between the observed and the predicted is the lifted conversions. Those lifted conversions help us understand what is the contribution. Now, as you can see, that's quite a bit of a difference, and the actual contribution here is quite big. We were able to move the business by 10.38%. I will say that that's on the high end. Typically doesn't come as high as this. And of course it's negative, but it's a positive in the sense of we experienced a drop and we expected a drop. As you hold back spend, you expect sales to go down. Now, if we go to the Heavy Up, just to show you how it looks. Again, we observed 20.7K, we predicted 19.8K. So obviously we were able to push the conversions up, proving that the tactic that we were testing, which is YouTube at this point, is incremental. It has the ability to move the needle for the business, which is what really everyone cares about. Now, obviously, once we get the contribution, we kind of work off that and build those performance metrics, which everyone cares about, and take it into actionable insights.
That's great. So Ty, like pause for a second there. Nick, if you see a result like that, like a 4.5% marginal contribution, Is that a good result, bad result? How would you?
I mean, I'm probably doing jumping. I'm probably doing jumping jacks. I think there's probably a reason that we decided to show that as a demo. I mean, that's a fantastic result, right? I mean, you don't have to be a marketer to realize that if I can show that heavying up with any channel moves sales by 4.5%, I mean, that's eye popping. Now, listen, being perfectly honest, we don't always see that type of pop, but it's not unheard of, right? So, there's often a couple different things that you find here, right? Maybe you find that, hey, like, if I turn off Facebook advertising, a lot of sales go away. Maybe that's not a shocker, but good to confirm, especially given how conversion lift studies don't seem to be working these days. Sometimes you test in and you find that you have a really big opportunities. Other times you find that, hey, I'm really up against a wall. There's not a lot of upside in this channel. Maybe I should look elsewhere, right? These are powerful results, but good, bad, and everywhere in between.
Yeah. There's one question here, Ty, I want you to address. One of the questions is, can you go a bit more into how you select markets? So when you talk about how the tool actually selects markets to be tested.
Okay, so I'm going to go into a little of a data science area. If I'm getting too detail oriented and technical, stop me. And I know Alvin is also circling around here, so you can also chime in if needed. There are 3 steps, basically. First, we identify your top contributors. These are markets that are generating the most revenue, and we do not want to harm them. So they are automatically top AU. Then we run a model on them, a linear regression model, to determine the correlation and identify which markets, other than the top AU markets, are correlated in behavior. And then we rank them. So there's a clustering component, and it ranks them top to bottom on who is the most correlated to least correlated. And then depending on the amount of cells that you have, cells are business question, I'm reminding us, the algorithm will allocate the best correlated markets to make sure that you're using the highest quality options out there for testing.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
And I think somebody asked what model we use. We actually have a range of models that you can select. We can use linear, lasso. We can actually do a simple pre-post. It's not advised, but there are situations where you might want to do a more simple pre-post.
Next, so Madan and Ty, we're speaking to what most marketers come into geotesting to do, which is either define what a given tactic or a given channel is contributing and driving to their total business, or explore the marginal scale potential in a given tactic or a given channel. And that's often where we start with geotesting. And to be honest, a lot of our clients have a lot of things they want to test on those questions. So that's often takes up quite a bit of the testing agenda. But then our clients start to get really creative with how they're going to use geotesting. And we want to talk to you guys about a more creative use case here that we thought was really interesting, quite compelling, for a bunch of different reasons. So what was this brand that we worked with here? Well, they were a high growth direct-to-consumer e-commerce brand. They've been around for about 5 years. Their annual media spend was around $50 million. And their average order value was around $50 as well. And I'll explain in the next slide why these things are fairly important when you're considering the design and what kind of business questions you want to answer. So what was their business objective? Well, this particular client had about 70–80% of their budget put into Facebook over the previous 12 months. And so they believe they had, by and large, exasperated the opportunity on Facebook, and they need to find other channels to grow into if they wanted to keep growing the business. So they were on the hunt for mid and upper funnel incremental growth opportunities. They had some data already on YouTube. They were already live on YouTube. So they thought, well, let's test there. But they didn't really know what their level of spend on YouTube was contributing, and they didn't really understand whether they should push or pull back. So they wanted to design a test that would inform the YouTube demand curve. They wanted a multi-cell test that would both inform that demand curve while also minimizing business risk and minimizing scale costs while getting as much information back as possible. Now, what is minimizing business risk and scale costs and things like that? What does that actually mean? Well, when you hold out media, and if that media is driving an impact on your business, then logically you're going to lose something. The business might decrease, even if it's only in a subset of the country. So there's always business risk to a holdout unless that media, the thing that's being held out, actually doesn't drive an impact, which happens sometimes. But going in, we generally assume there's some impact to the media. So that is what we quantify as the business risk. The cost to scale is quite obvious. I mean, it's that how much do you actually have to spend? And then there's business risk if they want to do a scale down. So how do we actually optimize to these constraints? We have a concept that we call the minimum detectable list. You probably have heard about it in other areas of marketing analytics. The way we use it in geo is to kind of set a threshold to govern our designs. And what that means is we're not going to scale up any more than it takes to drive what we think is a 3% impact on your business. Similarly, we're not going to scale down any more than it takes to see a negative 3% impact. So that's how we were able to optimize to these constraints while still building a design that returned valuable information. Nick, you want to go to the next slide? So what was our solution for this? Again, they wanted to inform the demand curve. Our solution that we worked on them with was a multi-cell test. Again, most of our clients start with scale-up tests and hold-out tests. This client came to us and said, what about a scale-down test? Can we do these things simultaneously? Can we use 3 tests at once to inform that demand curve? A bunch of considerations that went into this design. For starters, how can geo accommodate upper funnel channels with a long tail impact? Well, the longer the tail impact, the longer the test has to run. That's really the story. So a lot of our clients will run tests for, upper funnel tests for 60 days. Sometimes if you have a very, very high average order value, sometimes it has to run for, even longer than that. It depends on, your business and how long it takes to acquire a consumer, generally speaking. So that governs the length of the test. Now, in this case, very low average order value, we were able to execute this test in 30 days. And again, how do I know how much to scale up or scale down? That's what we were talking about before, the minimum detectable lift. There's all these different constraints that you can incorporate into your design. This is kind of where the art of geotesting comes in. How do you balance the different constraints? How do you achieve the maximum information return while limiting negative impact? That's the challenge with geodesign. One other question that always comes up, especially when clients really get into geotesting, is, well, how quickly can I retest? How much of a cooldown period do I need? So you almost always do need a cooldown period. I mean, Ty referenced before that there's about a 7-day cooldown on average. That's often for lower funnel tactics, right? If you have an upper funnel tactic that you think might take 60 days to make an impact on your bottom line, well, theoretically, you should have a longer cooldown period afterwards because the media will continue to have an impact even after you stop measuring it. So all of these come into play to determine kind of, what is the design, how much should you scale up, how much should you pull out in a scale down, and how long does the test need to run? So, a lot of our clients are very smart, as I'm sure all the marketers on this webinar are very smart, and no one really, takes Measured's word for our accuracy of prediction. So how do we, verify that our models can be used to accurately predict the counterfactual, which is, what would have happened if not for the treatment we're testing? We run AA analysis, and we do this before the experiment, and we do this to confirm that the models can be used to accurately predict counterfactual conversion events in the case where there wasn't a treatment. So what is AA analysis? AA analysis is kind of the opposite of an A/B test, right? In an A/B test, you're changing the treatment between A and B. Well, in an AA analysis, no treatment changes. That's why we call it AA. And so the idea would be, the absolutely perfect model with 100% accuracy would predict the actual result during a time where no treatment was applied. And so in this graph, we've effectively visualized the AA analysis. Your black dot is our prediction. The white dot is the actual result. Some of these, you can't tell the difference, right? South Carolina, the dots are on top of each other. Georgia, the dots are on top of each other. Some others, like Massachusetts, they're further apart, right? This analysis gives us the confidence in terms of both how accurately we can predict, but also the error band in that prediction. So we share this analysis, and it builds the confidence both, at Measured, also client side, and in the C-suite as well. So what were the results from this test? Just to recap, it was a scale down, a holdout, and a scale up. And so these are actually displayed in the opposite order. That's just how the results work out. The scale down, demonstrated a very high ROAS. When they reduced their spend simulating, somewhere around 2 point something million, they saw a very high ROAS, which is, to be expected. When they held out their media, which would be the middle dot, when they held it out, they still saw a very high ROAS, $1.20 incremental ROAS, and that's for their business as usual spend. So they were overperforming on their business as usual budget. And then we pushed real hard. We pushed real hard because that's kind of the point of a scale test. You might as well see how far it goes, as long as you have the budget to do it. And so they simulated over $50 million of annual YouTube prospecting spend, which, theoretically would make them one of the biggest advertisers on YouTube. And they found a really, really surprisingly high ROAS at that level. Now, that's not in their target. Their target is probably around $1. But they know if they want to push and they want to go hunt for incremental revenue, they know YouTube has it. This is a spot they can go to. So that was one takeaway. In a case where revenue or growth becomes the number one priority, they now know they can go to YouTube to drive it. So that was one key takeaway. The other key takeaway was actually being able to point at a specific dot in the curve and say, okay, I want $1 ROAS. How much can I spend nationally to get $1 ROAS? And what they ended up doing was nearly doubling their spend on YouTube while still hitting their performance targets.
James, just a quick question here, because I mean, this is obviously a pretty fantastic result with somebody spending, very heavily on YouTube. How can brands that are smaller or don't spend heavily into a channel, maybe you aren't spending at all on YouTube, how could brands like that leverage this, right? I mean, is this only powerful for big brands who are spending heavily on YouTube, or can this be, is this more accessible to anybody, frankly, at any spend level?
It's a great question, Nick. I and Ty and I work together quite a bit in this area. We run one of these geo-tests with our clients, led by our clients. And, our clients have seen a lot of success up and down the spend levels, meaning theoretically the spend could have been cut in half and we might have seen a very similar result. And, obviously all the ROAS would go up, but I think the level of spend doesn't necessarily dictate the results here. What is a very interesting idea, and we get a lot, clients are often trying to launch into new channels, right? I mean, in this case, this marketer or this brand was already in YouTube. That's why there's a dot in the middle there, right? But that's not always the case. We have a lot of clients who might not be in YouTube, or they're not in linear TV, or they're not in out of home, or they're only doing low funnel tactics on Facebook and they want to try upper funnel tactics. And they're not live there. So it's kind of a launch and test strategy. And the only real change in that environment is, we don't really have we don't have much information to go on in terms of what you're currently getting as a return from, because there is no current spend in that channel. So this is, again, where the art of kind of design comes into play. So in absence of any information about, hey, YouTube is contributing this much or this much, we would look at the rest of your program and we would look at it together. We'd help, ask some questions and hopefully help you understand what it would take amongst your other tactics to drive a 3% impact on your business. And, if all the other tactics are driving, a certain return against spend, well, that can give you a sense of saying, hey, this has got to hit the average. If I go into this new channel, I want it to at least hit my average. And so you can use that to try and understand the budget. It is important to note here, one of the best things about GeoTesting, it's not just geotesting, it's really all measurement, but certainly in geo. You're testing on a small subset of the country, right? So, even if you have to lean in fairly aggressively into a new channel that you don't really have any performance data behind, the actual percentage of your total budget you would need to invest in that kind of geotest is pretty small. We're not, clients are not typically having to put 5% of their total media budget into a new channel test for geo. It's normally much smaller than that.
Yeah, I mean, we're typically measuring in something like 10% of the country, right? So if you've got a new channel you haven't spent there, it'd be a difficult proposition to say, hey, I'm going to test out a 200K national budget. You know, the corresponding here would be, I'm going to test out a 20K budget in a very concentrated, you know, handful of geos. And that's going to give me a sense for what a 200K national budget would actually do for me. So it can be very powerful for advertisers who have smaller budgets and want to kind of see, you know, can I move the needle? And listen, we've all been in the instance where we try a new channel, we dip our toe in, we put some money in, we spread it nationally, and then we all look around and say, did this work? You know, typically speaking, you know, we can take budgets that are very similar to that and take this geo-testing approach and figure out, is there a there, right? And that can be very informative to think about how quickly can I scale? How quickly can I move these markets? Or frankly, should I look somewhere else for growth?
That's right. And one other thing I want to note there, Nick, because you make a very good point. You know, what next? Because like, yeah, they took this and ran with it as you'd expect. And I'm sure everyone on the call would have, you know, had a similar reaction to this kind of measurement return. But that wasn't the end of the story. Measurement's an ongoing process, and we're really measuring things in kind of a snapshot in time, right? And times change, the environment changes, the brand changes. We encourage, if not always on, very frequent testing. And so, you know, as they increase their spend, which they did not do overnight, it's not something you flip the switch and go to $50 million annually overnight. So as they were increasing the spend, several months later came up another test, another opportunity to confirm what are they getting from their current level of spend.
All right, so I think there's, and we'll certainly stick around past 3 o'clock, but I'd love to jump in to some of the questions. And actually, I'll start with one that came in on the chat a little while ago. And I think this is actually a great one. This is coming from a data scientist who says, hey, how do I kind of demystify geo from the C-suite? This was coming out of our question of like, hey, you know, my answer was why we're not running it. It's too complex, but I'm actually having a difficult time trying to explain this to the C-suite and kind of get buy-in from folks who maybe don't live and breathe this kind of stuff. Madan, James, how would you answer that? I mean, again, I think some of the stuff we ran through here in part would try to speak to that, but would love any additional insight that you might have on that question specifically.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, you have to start with the business question, right? I mean, that's what we do, at least Nick's team does really effectively, is distill the learning agenda into clean business questions that everybody, all the way from the top of the company to the people in the media team, can easily align with, and kind of speak to how the geo match market methodology is pretty transparent. You know, it actually kind of speaks in a very easy way to the executive suite, the C-suite, because it's a pretty transparent methodology. But you have to start with the learning agenda that is tied to the business questions that, you know, the DTC brand is grappling with. I would say.
And one thing I'd add to that, I mean, very simply, you know, this is not based on platform data. We're not doing this and looking at, does the number of Facebook conversions jump, things like that. We're actually looking at, do your sales move in these markets, right? I mean, we run these tests at state, DMA, or zip level for various reasons, but we're actually looking at, you know, did this DMA move? Did your sales go up? Did they go down? In theory, that should be easy to understand, right? Now, you know, how do we quantify that, and how do we go into it and things like that? Yeah, you got to get into some details, but ultimately kind of selling people on saying, listen, all of the iOS and all of these other things, and are these conversions that Facebook or Google or anybody else, you know, reports, are these real? You know, this is meant to kind of give you a workaround to be able to say, hey, I'm not actually gauging performance based on what Facebook tells me. I'm gauging performance based on whether I sold more, less, or the same within these specific geos coming directly out of my e-commerce platform, if you will. So,
that's right.
You know, hopefully that's something that does resonate at the executive level, because I know, and I get a lot of questions from those folks of like, I don't believe Facebook, I don't believe GA, I don't believe this, I don't believe that. So, you know, maybe that's an angle to use here. James, let me ask you a question. This is another one that came in, and I love this question. How do you think about geo? The question was specifically around marketing mix modeling, and how does geo, when should I use marketing mix? When should I use geo? I'll actually ask it a little differently, because I think the better question is how these things can work together. And marketing mix is one example, but you can think about a bunch of other marketing measurement techniques. How does geo kind of sit within that?
That's a great question. Our general approach is more measurement is better always. So, generally speaking, when we start working with our clients, it starts by saying, what measurement have you done recently? Is there anything that you're looking at now that could inform, your learning agenda? And so to start, it helps inform the learning agenda. Any other alternative measurement that's out there, whether it's a media mix model, an MTA model, or, a vendor conversion lift study, as is often the case, all of that helps inform the learning agenda. Where should you prioritize testing? You don't go geo-test everywhere immediately. And you can't. So what do you prioritize and how? So it helps inform that. And I would also note that, geo is measuring the way most of our clients use it. It's measuring fairly granular media tactics, right? Non-brand search is often, but sometimes clients are splitting that out into different tactics as well. And so it can get fairly granular. And media mix modeling often is going to give you more channel level information about what things are contributing. And so I think the two actually work in tandem fairly well. We have, a lot of our partners and our clients are really using all things available to understand different contribution and impact.
I'd specifically say this: you can take results from a geo and you can use them to inform Bayesian priors in a marketing mix model, for example. I think there are actually two great use cases of how geo can enhance marketing mix. The first one is correlation does not equal causality, right? I have never seen a marketing mix model that didn't say brand search didn't drive some level of sales. That is probably the case, but it might not be. We have seen geotests where all of those, brand search conversions track over to SEO, they convert just as effectively. That's something that you're only going to find with an in-market test. So that's one way specifically that you can enhance your models. Another way that I think is great is, marketing mix models are very good with things that have a long history of data at known spend levels. They draw a curve very effectively, but they don't draw a curve out to spend levels that you've never spent at before. They can project it, but good luck. And this can actively, what we did on the YouTube test, it actively drew out the curve to places that you had never spent before in a way that is much more credible than trying to take the line that you have in a marketing mix model and draw the dashes out, because that line can diverge pretty heavily depending on how much spend history you have. So I think those are two great ways that geo can enhance marketing mix as well.
Hey, Nick, can you address this question? This seems an interesting question. How can we do geo-testing efficiently when channel leads don't believe in its efficiency, as it reduces the audience size significantly and increases CPMs? I'm sure you run across this question as well. When you take a small audience, you scale into it, the CPMs are going to change. This question comes up. How do you address it?
Sure. So let me put it this way, and let's kind of talk about James's example where we pushed heavily into YouTube, right? So if you push heavily into YouTube and we really kind of blitz the channel, what we're really looking for is, do I have a credible way to move the market? Now, if I were to tiptoe up to $50 million, would I get there more efficiently? Very likely, yes. But the time and effort that you would spend to figure out whether that was even worth your time is like immense. It might take you multiple years to scale to $50 million on YouTube. Instead, what I'm answering is, do I actually see that I can move sales at those types of spend levels? Now, how quickly I scale to that spend level, how much efficiencies I gain by optimizing along the way. Like, in a lot of ways, you can argue, yeah, this is probably a worst case scenario for efficiency because I just blitzed the market. We're actually answering a question of like, is it worth your time? And of course, channel managers are going to want to inch up and optimize every step along the way. That's their job. But should you actually focus your time and effort on having them do that? Now, if you see a geo move by 5% when you saturate it, you can actually come to the conclusion that yes, it's worth our time. And actually the channel manager might deliver even better performance than what I've seen because they're going to optimize along the way. So I actually would say that that's not a bug. That's actually a feature of geo-testing, right? Because you're building in, all of this stuff and all of these inefficiencies, you're actually building that in, and you're almost projecting out a worst case scenario. Now, I would take the counterfactual here, or the converse, and say, listen, if I blitz the market and it didn't move at all, like I don't know if there's any amount
Right,
of
yeah.
optimization that's going to create upside that I'm going out and telling you it just doesn't exist there. So optimization finds efficiencies. If a geotest says you can't move a market, you're not going to optimize into that. So, you know, I
There's also
do
one
think,
more point. One more point they were making about audience saturation. I think the point is that, are you going to saturate your audiences and essentially like take away demand because of a different execution? Can you speak to that? How we're only taking a small set of geos and scaling into that. The actual business risk, either at saturation or holdout, is pretty limited.
Yeah, I mean, what we're typically working with here in a given cell, and again, what we're trying to do is find a group of geos that hit statistical significance and have a certain statistical power. I mean, again, typically speaking, that's about 5 states. It's about 8 to 10 DMAs. It's about 20 to 30 zips. Again, that the zip stuff depends on size and all those sorts of things. You know, we're actually designing a test, and we're specifically picking states that allow you to kind of test this at ways that reach a statistical hurdle, but also minimize the amount of spend that you have to do to scale, the amount of business risk you have to put in when you pull brand search out of a market. I mean, the whole, you know, the design process that Ty went into, there's a lot of thought around actually like addressing these concerns. You know, oh my God, I can't turn off branded search nationally, right? Like, God, there's so many sales that go away. Well, we're not going to do it nationally. We're going to do it in, you know, less than 10% of the country. We're going to put X amount of conversions at risk for a 30-day period. You know, what you learn from that is going to be a lot more valuable than the conversions that we put at risk during that time period.
There is a question about interactive effects. If you look at the last one.
Yes. So interaction effects, and this is really important, and I'll actually let James expand on this one. Interaction effects are important, right? Like, and this is especially true at the bottom of the funnel. When you turn off branded search, you do not lose all those conversions because those conversions tend to go elsewhere. So James, can you talk a little bit about how we actually, when we do these holdouts, we go into some of these channel interactions and look at source medium to help understand what is going on here when I turn off? Why is the incrementality that I'm seeing? What am I getting?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the halo effects question is kind of next level for geotest marketers, and it comes up, you know, just like that margin, you know, when you're trying to draw the demand curve, that's next level. So is trying to understand the halo effects of your channels and different tactics against each other, right? And Nick, you're speaking to, you know, whether something's non-incremental because there's another media channel that's actually driving the impact, or if it's non-incremental because it was going to happen organically. That's what that analysis informs. We get more information about why is this non-incremental? And that really helps people understand and gain confidence in the decision, right? It's one thing to say, well, we measured very little contribution or impact from brand search, you should turn it off, right? It's another thing to say, well, you measured not a big contribution from brand search, and here's the evidence of why it's non-incremental, right? It's non-incremental because when you turn it off, a lot of that traffic comes in through SEO, or it comes in through direct, or it comes in through another search channel.
Okay, James and Nick, can you speak to the testing itself, how we actually test for interactive effects, where we put 2 channels in the same cell?
Yeah, so I actually want to talk through I want to talk through a really interesting example that James and I just went through with a brand. We actually had significant suspicions that they were very overspent on branded search. So we did a holdout for branded search, and we confirmed that actually the incrementality of their branded search channel was very low, something like 5%. And net of that, they were way overspent. Now, we also saw a very interesting thing when we actually looked at the traffic within those geos. We saw that roughly 2/3 of the traffic that was lost to branded search, so those conversions, they were actually captured by organic and SEO, right? So people that find you regardless. The other third was captured by their branded shopping campaigns. So actually it was a combination of paid campaigns, branded shopping, versus organic and SEO that was picking up the traffic. And that was really interesting. It's like, hey, you know, your branded search and branded shopping campaigns, they don't exist in a vacuum, nor do they exist in a vacuum with your SEO. So we actually set up a second test. We're actually running through a second test right now, where we look at turning off branded search in one cell, turning off branded shopping in another cell, and turning off both in a third cell to understand kind of fully, well, should I be spending less on both of these? Should I be spending on shopping and not brand? Or should I be spending on either of these, right? And depending on how that test comes back, you may find that, hey, shopping's much more effective and picks up all the lost conversions than branded search, or vice versa. Or maybe you find that organic and SEO does like the majority of the legwork for both of those channels and neither of them are needed. And those are the kind of things when you start thinking about, and it's very often that we'll start with like, hey, what happens when I turn branded search off? What happens when I turn Facebook off? And as you get more and more sophisticated with these geo-tests, you'll start getting into these multi-cell, like drawing out the curve on YouTube, talking through interaction effects with cells, things like this. There is, and especially once you start getting down into zip code level testing, where you have, you know, thousands of zip codes to work with, you can actually run a whole lot of these tests at a given time. You know, you think about the number of cells that you have at your availability to test, you know, across a whole bunch of channels or interaction effects across a number of these different things. The power even gets larger when you start thinking about it at that level.
Yeah, and I think the key point, you know, one of the key points there is, you know, we're enabling marketers with geo, and they're coming to us with really clever designs and things they want to test, things that we never thought of. And, you know, that's really the power of the product and why we think it could be game changing. We think that all marketers have really brilliant ideas for geo-testing if they only had the tools.
Guys, there's one question we missed about incrementality assumptions. What is the incrementality assumption we punch into the geo tool? James, you want to take a quick swing at that?
Yeah, absolutely. So what that means is, you know, there's often either some measurement before we're measuring it with geo, or sometimes we're doing data-driven analysis to try and estimate what a given tactic's incrementality is. So there's an assumption going into the test, right? You're making an assumption about how much is this contributing to my business, you know, in my current level of spend, and then all the other design decisions we talked about kind of flow down funnel from there. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's an assumption. So, you know, does that make the design less reliable? Are there any issues with the design? Is it driven by this assumption? No, because you actually build that assumption into your design logic. And so you use things like the minimum detectable lift to give you buffer in case you're off on your, you know, incremental assumption for that tactic. So it's kind of like being aware of your blind spots. You know, be aware of the blind spots, be aware of the assumptions, and kind of design with them in mind.
And James, for the measured clients, you know, would be good to say that you advise clients on potential benchmarks you want to apply as a starting point for the design, and then start from there to figure out what kind of strength you want in the test to be able to measure the levels of lift that you're looking for.
That's
okay.
Right. I mean, you know, that's right, Madan. Sorry.
Any other questions? Nick, do you see any other questions you want to take on here?
We've seen a couple CPG questions. I will just throw out there that, you know, we do need, if you don't have first party sales data, we would need something like IRI or something at the geo granularity level. There was a follow-up question. If that data is lagged, does it affect us? It shouldn't affect us at all. We would just have to wait longer to deliver the read. If you had a 2-week delay in getting sales data, there'd just be an extra 2 weeks where we'd have to wait for that data to come in and do the analysis. None of the design or you know, implementation would be affected in that instance.
That's right. By the way, it's all automated, at least for most channels. So it would just show up eventually. You just have to wait and be cognizant of the data.
Thank you, everybody, for the time. You know, obviously, we are here and would love to talk more with Geo about anybody, with anybody. So if you're a client, reach out to myself or your CS rep. If you're not a client, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd reach out to any of us on LinkedIn. We love talking about this stuff. I think with that, thank you to the panelists. Thank you for everybody who attended. Sorry for the Wi-Fi issues. I'm sure we'll get a few laughs out of that, and hopefully we'll see you next